Oliver Gregory, there's a new robot human in town, and her name is Elizabeth Afton, and Vanessa and Vanny, and probably the head of Fazbear Entertainment LLC too.
Yeah. We're gonna talk about that. MatPat just released a wild game theory, and it's one of my favorite kinds of theories on YouTube. The kind that makes you go, oh god, he's right. Now, as per usual on this channel, we're not going to be critiquing the theory itself. More so, we're going to be looking at the repercussions that this theory could have in the timeline if it proves to be true. And while we do that, we'll look for other supporting evidence we can find on the way. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients. What exactly was the theory posited by MatPat and his team? Well, I'm only going to go over it very briefly. So if somehow you found this video before you found the game theory video, please, when you're done here, go watch the full video on game theory for the entire theory, the context, and the evidence. But do that after you watch this video, because if you leave this video too quickly, it'll hurt it in the algorithm. I'll put a link in the description and at the end, I promise. But for the theory itself, to be incredibly brief and oversimplify, the idea boils down to the game timeline paralleling the book timeline. And in the games, instead of Henry being the one to build several robotic versions of Charlie after her death, William was the one to build several differently aged robotic versions of Elizabeth. This would explain why Vanessa is so similar to Elizabeth in so many ways. It's why Vanny and Vanessa look so similar without being the same person, why the girl in the Ruin poster looks so similar to Elizabeth, and can even explain why someone bought up Fazbear Entertainment and keeps doing business decisions that are helping to revive William Afton, as Elizabeth seems to be the only person in the FNAF canon who likes and supports William. Again, after this video, go watch the full game theory video. It's very well made, and it has a little cameo of yours truly, which is crazy to think about, and I'm still very humbled and thankful that something like that can even happen. But anyway, let's just start looking at the evidence that can support this theory and the ripples in the timeline it creates. The first thing to consider is, when would this have happened? I think it makes the most sense for this to happen before Afton becomes Springtrap. I mean, I feel like you would need most of his dexterity, and it doesn't really give him a lot of time if he's locked up in a back room until FNAF 3 to then create a bunch of Elizabots. So keeping logic in mind, I think it makes the most sense for this to happen pretty much immediately after Elizabeth's death. A lot of people, myself included, consider the death of Elizabeth to be one of the inciting incidents in the story. Now, I don't think it's the first one, because I think William needs a compelling reason to build the fun times in the first place, but I think it is definitely one of the first ones out there. And once the fun times are built, we've then established that William knows about Remnant, is doing experiments with Remnant, and is starting to learn the inner workings of how possession works. Right then would be the perfect time for him to start experiments with the Elizabots. It's sort of an escalation of the logic Henry uses in the books. Henry's logic is to just create a robotic replica of his late daughter. That way they can still live with the memory of her living with them. She gets to have a sort of sentience. It gets weird when you talk about robot moralities, but this isn't Detroit Become Human, I'm not talking about that. William doesn't just want copies. He invented the scooper, something that by definition injects Remnant into a robot. Why would he want to do this? You're just my pointer today. Are you just vibing? Vibing kitty? So that once he's completed the smallest version of Elizabeth, he can inject Elizabeth's soul from Circus Baby into it. Then every time he moved up a robot age, he could repeat the process. And theoretically, he could do this until he ran out of materials to make more Elizabots, or keeled over as an old man. This fits into the game timeline surprisingly well. But then the question becomes, why did he never inject Circus Baby into the first Elizabot? And how did the Elizabots break free from the sister location bunker? Well, I actually have a surprising finding that might explain this. So let's mix our ingredients and see what kind of theories come together. So, sort of an announcement, for the anniversary of the video that really kicked off this channel, the timeline video I posted last year, I wanted to do a 4-part mini-series in December. I know Game Theory is also mentioning of doing a master timeline for their side, but the timeline I'm looking at is a little bit different. Looking into the timeline theory that I've been kind of crafting in these past few videos, I think there's two distinct timelines in FNAF right now. There's the old timeline of the games from FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night, and the new timeline of Help Wanted to now. And then the old games in the new timeline are a dubious canon. Either they did happen or they didn't happen. It's hard to tell with the evidence we have right now, but they definitely happened in the old timeline. So if we solve that old timeline, either we solve the timeline of FNAF up until Help Wanted, or we solve the timeline of FNAF that wants to be presented by Fazbear Entertainment in the current new timeline. So Either way, it's a win. So what I wanted to do in December was make 2 videos compiling all of the lore evidence in every FNAF game from FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night. Every single piece of lore I can find, compile it, put it into videos on the internet so then other people can use it for research purposes. Then the third video, are you done being my pointer? Okay, bye. Then the third video would be linking those pieces together to form a timeline. The fourth video on December 30th will be a standalone, just no frills timeline video. And then that way, if you want evidence for the timeline, I can just direct to the 3 videos before and we don't have to waste time in the timeline video. So mark your calendars. December 30th, we will be making the definitive old timeline of FNAF, using only evidence from the games from FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night, and we'll see what comes out of it. Of all the timelines ever made, it'll be one of them. Okay, announcement aside, the reason I bring this up, besides to announce it, is that I found something really interesting in FNAF 1. Take a look at these posters. Yeah, okay, we know these. These are like the quintessential FNAF lore. This is FNAF 1. Occasionally, one of the posters can turn into a newspaper article. This tells us about the first missing children incident. 5 kids go missing, the robots seem to have an acrid smell, and that's it. That's old news. But notice twice in these articles, it's mentioned that the culprit of the missing child incident was not only found, but convicted. William Afton went to jail. Like prison. If this is true, this has huge implications for the timing of the timeline. Think about it. He created the Fun Times to experiment with remnant injection. With the knowledge that he wanted to eventually create an Elizabot with Elizabeth's soul in it, the pieces start to fall into place. That's why he wanted to inject remnant into the Fun Times. He wanted to test out his method without risking losing his daughter's soul. That's why Circus Baby doesn't seem to have any remnant injected inside her. He knows Elizabeth's soul is already in there, so he doesn't want to compromise it. That's why he asks Michael to go in the sister location bunker. This has sort of been a sticking point for myself and a lot of other theorists out there. In the monologue we get from Michael at the end of Sister Location, we hear this.
I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to. She's free now.
It was right where you said it would be? I put her back together? The big question lingering on everyone's minds, at least mine, why in the hell would William tell Michael to go down in the bunker and complete an experiment for him? Why would William just not do it himself? Why would William want to share knowledge about the sister location bunker to anybody, let alone Michael, someone I'm pretty sure he knows wants to do him in or wants nothing to do with him? Why didn't he do it himself? Because he couldn't. He was in prison. If William is behind bars, he can't check on his Elizabots. He can't check on Circus Baby, which he knows has the soul of Elizabeth in it. If he was going to prison for a long time, he would need someone to continue his experiments, or at the very least, just try to inject Elizabeth into an Elizabot so she can live happily outside of that bunker until he gets out to finish the experiment. But Michael failed the task. He failed and misunderstood what William was trying to tell him. If William said something like, your sister is there, go put her back together, and we see what Michael does in Sister Location because of it, Michael never found the room of Elizabots. He was caught off guard. He found Circus Baby being possessed by his late sister, and before he could figure out anything else, he's killed by the Fun Times, and then Ennard escapes. And we all know that when Ennard escapes, eventually Elizabeth gets booted from the tribe. Now, we were all going off of the notion this is because Elizabeth supports and likes William Afton, whereas the rest of Ennard really hates his guts. But now there could be another reason. If Elizabeth knows the Elizabots are in that bunker waiting to be turned on and used, but every other Fun Time would want nothing to do with that bunker, so logically they would split. Scrap Baby would split off of Ennard, forming Molten Freddy, because she wants to go back down there, release the Elizabots, and get into one of them. She doesn't want to be Scrap Baby, she wants to be Elizabeth. But then when she gets there and starts turning on the Elizabots, no matter how many she turns on, none of them know how to use the scooper. They need William Afton, so they go out and look for him. Scrap Baby goes and wanders some alleyways and the other Elizabots disperse. Now, the Follow Me minigames from FNAF 3 make even more sense. If Afton is eventually released from prison, he'd go to that bunker and find nobody there. Seeing that Circus Baby and all the Elizabots are gone, he'd probably assume that all is well, or that he at least needs more remnant to continue his work. So he would probably go to the most recently closed Freddy Fazbear's to try to collect more remnant. He gets inside, he lures them into the back room, but once he's disassembled all but Golden Freddy, the souls corner him into a springlock suit and he dies. Now, this does technically hinge on a theory that not a lot of people support for a decent reason. It's the idea that the fun times are either made from parts of remnant of the original animatronics, which seems more likely, or that the fun times are infused with the second missing child incident. Now, some people argue that there's only one, but I believe the evidence in FNAF 2 points us to 2 different missing child incidents. But regardless, I think this holds weight. Okay, I admit I ranted there for a moment. When I was writing this script, my mind was going a mile a minute and my fingers were just trying to keep up. So let me summarize and make this as succinct as possible and just straightforward tell what the timeline would be, or at least a possible timeline, if there are indeed multiple Elizabeths in Security Breach. So let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of theories rise. After the crying child's death in the jaws of a Fredbear animatronic, William Afton kills the children responsible in retaliation, shoving their bodies into the very animatronic suits that they did his son, save for his eldest son, Michael. But then he starts to notice the animatronics acting strangely, almost possessed. It's as if the children's souls attached to the machines. He needed to know more in case there was a way of bringing his son back. So then he makes the Funtime animatronics, a set of animatronics essentially built to recreate the Bite of 83, but in a more controlled environment. But then that backfires, and it instead kills his only daughter, Elizabeth Afton. He locks the Funtimes into the bunker he built them in, but then he notices Circus Baby speaking with the memories of Elizabeth, combined with the personality and programming of Circus Baby. He was right, and he can bring his own daughter back too. He begins to work on robotic versions of his daughter, with the personality and programming to match the soul. That way he can optimize compatibility. Once he has a good number of Elizabeths created and is confident he can keep creating them as she ages, he begins working on the Scooper, a machine specifically invented to inject remnant into an animatronic. But he realizes he needs more remnant to work with to truly test this out. So he goes to the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria and starts to do experiments there. He gets enough remnant to inject the fun times, and it seems like it's going well. But as he collects more remnant, he gets sloppy. He gets caught. He goes to prison. Now, William Afton can't continue his experiments, and his own daughter is stuck, haunting an animatronic in a locked bunker. Desperate to continue, he calls his eldest son from prison. Knowing he can't say too much without causing an investigation, he tells him to go to that place. She'll be there, put her back together. He means to put Elizabeth's soul into an Elizabeth and set her free. But when Michael goes down, he's caught off guard. He never finds the Elizabeths. He's instead killed, setting free Ennard. But when Elizabeth's soul wants to go back to the bunker to set herself free, they split, forming Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. Scrap Baby goes down and starts activating and setting free the other Elizabeths, but since none of them can operate the Scooper, they instead seek out Afton. Eventually, Afton is released from prison, checks on the bunker, and finds it completely empty. From his perspective, it might have worked. Michael maybe did it. Now he would focus on recreating his son. He goes to the closed down Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and begins disassembling the animatronics there to get access to more remnant, but is cornered into the Springlock suit and dies. Thus, we have Springtrap to Scrap Trap, Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby, and plenty of Elizabeths. Enough that one of them can buy the company, one can infiltrate the new subsidiaries under it so that Elizabeth can watch the whole way through, and finally reunite with her father. I know this is crazy, but it's an interpretation of the timeline that could 1. Lend itself to the multiple Elizabeth theory, and 2. Match with the current motivations of Burntrap that we can surmise, wanting to recreate his family. Look, y'all know you were signing up for a wild theory if we're going with Elizabeth's all the way down. But I feel really confident about game theory's interpretation. Even if what I propose for the timeline isn't accurate, I think there's more truth to this situation than there is falsehoods. Regardless, like I said at the beginning, if you haven't yet, please go watch the game theory video that I'm talking about in question. It's right here and in the description. It's wonderful. Go check it out. As always, shout out to the best patrons, the Toasted Slices, Emberisk, Zenith, Raven Eris, Charlie Bean, Lovey Puppy, Stormachow, Just BKZ, Chickpea, Isle, Lola Fembo, James, The Viper 26, and Loose Harriet. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, Slices.